What makes you a Buddhist? I often meet people who are attracted to the Buddhist ideas of compassion and bodhicitta, but who do not have the urge to take refuge in Buddhism due to a lack of insight into the teachings. As a result, I would like to talk about what taking refuge in Buddhism means for your life, and why it is necessary if you want to travel on the Buddhist path. Today's world benefits enormously from technological advances and material riches. Nonetheless, people do not seem to be all that happy. It appears that material development has failed to eliminate people's inner suffering at its root. If we search the whole world for happiness, we will find Buddhism can truly help us attain inner peace and joy. Growing up in the Tibetan region, I know very well how much Tibetans struggle with impoverishment. In terms of material scarcity, they are no different from people elsewhere. However, under the influence of Buddhism, they almost always remain content and peaceful with what they have. In summertime, on the wonderful grasslands of the high plateau, people gather to sing and dance, and they remain cheerful regardless of their harsh living conditions. Their carefree spirit is rarely seen in other places with a much higher living standard, where the incidence of suicide, for example, is not uncommon. Since almost everyone in the world fears death, choosing such a way to end one's life can only be reflective of how unbearable their inner suffering must be. It is for the sake of leading a truly happy life that I hope people can gain at least some understanding of Buddhism, even if they are not Buddhists. As a Buddhist monk, I know Buddhism is by no means associated with superstition or nihilism as perceived by some people. Conversely, the teachings by our teacher, the Buddha Shakyamuni, emanated from his vast compassion and profound wisdom. They are greatly beneficial to all beings, especially at the moment of death. When death approaches, what wealth and power can do to help the dying process is limited to material things. I have a young student who studies in Europe. A few years ago, when visiting, she told me a story. One of her classmates came from a prestigious family and was incredibly wealthy. Not long ago, the father of the classmate was diagnosed with leukemia. Having heard the news, the family became very saddened, as did the father, who lived in great pain in the shadow of death. The wealth and status he possessed did not help relieve his suffering. Instead, his intense clinging to them made him even more miserable. As a result of this incident, my student felt that wealth and status, the lifetime pursuit for most people, provided little consolation when one is dying. She said that she would return to China after finishing her study and live a simple life focused on learning and practicing Buddhism. She is from a well-off family and has lived a comfortable life. I was quite amazed that at the age of only 17, she would have such mature insight into life. How might a Buddhist face death? Here is another story of one of my students. She was a devoted practitioner and had been practicing Dharma for some years. Then she was diagnosed with advanced cancer. During the last days of her life, she did not panic. Instead, she calmly made the necessary arrangements in time, offering all her Buddha statues and pictures to her spiritual friends, while keeping only her root teacher's image by her pillow. Fearful that painkillers might interfere with her thinking and impede her chances of obtaining a favorable rebirth, she requested not to be given any injections for pain relief. She also asked her family to keep her grandson away at her final moment, as she was very much attached to him. Although her family members were not Buddhists, they nonetheless agreed to do what she asked. On her deathbed, her daughter called me. I asked her to place the phone by her mother's ear. Then, through the phone, I performed a transference ritual and recited some sacred names of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas for about 30 minutes. Then her family saw that she placed her palms together and passed away peacefully. Deeply impressed, her daughter, her son-in-law, and other family members started to develop faith in Buddhism. Later, when I visited the city where they lived, the whole family took refuge in the Three Jewels and became devoted Buddhists, just as the mother once did. In the not-too-distant future, we all must meet death. The above two stories offer you a glimpse of how Buddha Dharma and its incredible blessing power can help one navigate the dying process as well as to live more meaningfully. In particular, Buddha Dharma is the only support for one's liberation at the final and the most crucial moment. Therefore, for joyful living and ultimate spiritual liberation, may all of us devote some time to understanding Buddhism. The first step on the Buddhist path is to take refuge in the Three Jewels. I often hear a saying that there is no need for the refuge ritual provided one has the Buddha in mind. Indeed, it is great to have the Buddha in mind, as this is the result of one's karmic connection with Buddha Dharma and merit accumulated in the past. However, this in itself is not sufficient to make one a Buddhist. Any beginner who wants to traverse the Buddhist path must start with a formal refuge ritual. Imagine that you, for the first time in your life, bow and make offerings to sublime Buddha images, with keen devotion and in the presence of your teacher. Then you join your hands together and follow the teacher reciting the refuge verses, making vows to take refuge in the teacher, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha from now on until complete enlightenment. That in itself will bring a tremendous transformation to your mind, and it is only through this refuge ritual that you become a genuine Buddhist. It is also essential to take the refuge vow. According to the great Indian sage Atisha, the refuge vow is the basis of the lay people's vow, bodhisattva vow, and tantric vow, all of which can only be received through specific rituals. In other words, without the refuge vow, it is impossible for one to receive all the other vows. Without those other vows, it is impossible for one to practice many methods of Dharma. And without practicing these, it is impossible for one's mind to be in tune with the teachings and eventually achieve liberation. In this respect, refuge is the gateway to all methods of Dharma. Atisha had a famous saying, "Refuge is what makes Buddhism different from other faiths and beliefs." After his arrival in Tibet, his preaching at almost every Dharma gathering started with taking refuge. For this, he was called the Pandita of Refuge. Revered as a great Buddhist master in both India and Tibet, Atisha was instrumental in the 11th century revival of Buddhism in Tibet. The strong emphasis on refuge placed by such a master shows how crucial refuge is to Buddhist practice. Among those who resist the idea of taking refuge are also people who do not understand the refuge vow and are concerned about the potential restrictions by the vow on their actions. The refuge vow, stipulated by the Buddha, is meant to serve as guidance for beginners. It is both straightforward and easy to observe for anyone who desires liberation. The essential part of the vow is to have unflinching faith in one's teacher and the three jewels, and to refrain from abandoning the teacher and the three jewels under any circumstances, even if doing so will put one's life at risk. If one has such faith and resolution, one is ready to take refuge in Buddhism. On the other hand, I do not believe that a person can be defined as a true Buddhist without genuine faith in the three jewels, even if one has undergone the refuge ritual, received a certificate and a Dharma name, and so on. In Tibet, people do not have refuge certificates, but most of them are faithful and devoted Buddhists. Therefore, when one takes refuge, faith in the three jewels must come first, avoiding overemphasis on formalities. The three jewels in which one takes refuge refer to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Going for refuge in the Buddha, one seeks for and relies on no other guides but the Buddha and all other Buddhas of the past, present, and future. Going for refuge in the Dharma, one seeks and practices no other ways but the 84,000 methods of Dharma transmitted by the Buddha for the benefit of all beings, including the methods taught by Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana Buddhism. Going for refuge in the Sangha, one seeks no other spiritual companions on the path other than monastic members who follow the teachings of the Buddha. More specifically, the Sangha refers to a group of 4 or more monastic members in Hinayana Buddhism, while any enlightened person can be called the jewel of the Sangha in Mahayana Buddhism. Since one becomes a Buddhist after going through the formal refuge rite, they should start to learn Buddha Dharma through hearing, contemplation, and practice in order to blend the teachings with their mental continuum. Importantly, one should first generate renunciation, a mind that has no desire for and attachment to any temporal pleasures and enjoyment in the 6 realms, but only yearns for liberation from samsara. Renunciation is like the philosopher's stone, turning all the virtue and merit we accumulate into the cause of liberation. It is certainly best if we can stay away from all worldly concerns and practices with intense focus like Milarepa. However, this is hardly possible for most people, even including some monastics. So if you cannot abandon all worldly concerns, you should at least bear in mind that liberation is the most important and ultimate goal of your life. If you practice step by step and persevere, your attachment to and desire for worldly things will subside gradually until you reach the final goal of liberation. Imagine that we want to travel to Lhasa. To fulfill the goal, we need to first set Lhasa as our destination. Then we take steps toward it, and do not waver regardless of any obstacles we may encounter. With perseverance, we will be able to reach Lhasa one day. Similarly, if our focus is wealth and power and other worldly concerns, no matter what we practice, liberation will never be within reach. Once we have generated renunciation, we should further generate bodhicitta, the foundation of Buddhahood. By bodhicitta, we refer to the altruistic aspiration. One takes refuge in the 3 jewels and practices Dharma not only for one's own joy and liberation, but also for all beings' attainment of Buddhahood. For beginners, bodhicitta is not easy to arouse. Thus, Patrul Rinpoche, in his Words of My Perfect Teacher, teaches us how to cultivate bodhicitta gradually. One of the methods is to start with our loved ones and try to generate compassion and bodhicitta toward them. Next, we extend our compassion and bodhicitta to people to whom we feel no natural attachment and with whom we have no relationship. And finally, we grow compassion and bodhicitta toward those who have done harm to us. Through this gradual process, bodhicitta will eventually grow in us, and with bodhicitta as a mental support, every virtuous act we do becomes the seed of attaining Buddhahood. Both renunciation and bodhicitta should be present in our motivation when we go for refuge. If one goes for refuge with only wealth, family, career, and so forth in mind, their motivation deviates from the right path of refuge and Dharma practice. In light of their significance, Tsongkhapa, in his famous work The Three Principal Aspects of the Path, elaborates on the three most pivotal elements leading to complete enlightenment: renunciation, bodhicitta, and uncontrived insight into emptiness. Therefore, as a Buddhist, one should also abstain from killing, for it is contrary to the very idea of compassion and bodhicitta. Some people regard all human beings as equal, but do not think there should be equality between animals and humans. This attitude reveals their lack of insight into various forms of life. If one examines carefully, they will find that animals do not differ in the way they feel joy and pain, even though they are unable to speak to us in human language. When animals are cold, they gather to warm each other, while on hot days they search for cool places to stay. I have been promoting and performing animal release in different regions for some years. I often observe that those cattle and sheep in slaughterhouses show great terror when seeing others of their kind being killed ahead of them. Some of them cry out of fear, just like humans, and some even kneel down before the people about to kill them. From the Buddhist perspective, if we only talk about equality among people, but do not treat animals equally, it is not an expression of unbiased compassion. Taking the life of any sentient being is not just in violation of compassion and bodhicitta. It can also cause ill effects under the law of cause and effect. Patrul Rinpoche said that killing one being requires 500 lives of one's own to repay. And the Sutra of 100 Actions says, even after 100 kalpas, or eons, beings' actions are never lost. When the conditions come together, their fruit will fully ripen. Thus, killing without subsequent confession will give rise to painful effects that impact the killer. For the sake of ourselves and other beings, we should do our best to abstain from killing. I also hope that people refrain from eating meat after taking refuge, if possible. Not eating meat is a common practice adopted by different lineages of Buddhism. In most regions, it is relatively easy to rely on a pure vegetarian diet. Modern science also proves the health benefits of a vegetarian diet. From the Buddhist perspective, a vegetarian diet is not only beneficial for health and longevity, but also conducive to favorable rebirth. If one cannot completely refrain from the consumption of meat at the beginning, they should eat only 3 kinds of pure meat. 1. The unseen, meat that one has not witnessed killed, specifically for their consumption. 2. The unheard, meat that one has not heard killed, specifically for their consumption. And 3. The unsuspected, meat that one has not suspected was killed, specifically for their consumption. While the karmic effect of eating these 3 kinds of pure meat is still grave, it is much less severe than if one participated in the killing. Some people get used to eating meat every day, and it is hard for them to change their diet all at once. In this case, they should start with eating less meat every day. After that, they may try not to eat meat on Buddhist holy days. As a next step, they might consider a vegetarian-only diet during the month of miracles, the first Tibetan month, and the month of the Buddha turning the Dharma wheel, the 6th Tibetan month. Through these progressive steps, they can ultimately quit eating meat. Eating less meat is also an effective way to save animal lives. I hope that all people of Buddhist faith can achieve this. Finally, as a Buddhist, one must practice diligently. Otherwise, one cannot benefit from the Dharma in the truest sense. Our behavior and mental states will remain the same year after year. And when we finally meet death, we will only have regret for not making any spiritual progress. Some people like to think that they do not have time right now and would rather wait till their retirement to practice. Life changes with every second that goes by. It's hard to say how much longer we will live. If we do not take the opportunity and practice right now, we may never get the chance to practice at a later time. A while ago, Denpo Dasen from the Tasher Trilling Retreat Center was invited to recite Buddhist texts as a rebirth blessing for an old man who was dying. The man told Khenpo that he was very regretful. Instead of practicing Dharma, he committed many negative deeds in his younger years. Now that he already felt tremendous agony, he feared that he might fall to a lower rebirth, where the suffering would be much more severe if he were to die soon. He prayed for Khenpo to help him live longer, even just for one more year. If so, he promised that he would do nothing but engage in Dharma practice to avoid a lower rebirth. Unfortunately, the man died soon after Khenpo Dasen's return to Tasher Trilling. Having heard the news, I felt extremely sad. One day, we all will die. Since we have the good fortune of being connected with the Buddha's teachings in this life, we should make the best use of our life by putting the teachings into practice and practicing well.